Welcome back to another episode of Bisrat for Africa. We're a channel that seeks to clarify misconceptions about Christianity. And so, what we do is we engage in discussions, we ask questions, we try and answer some questions to the best of our ability. We don't claim to have all the answers, but when we do have a conviction about what the truth is, we definitely try and let others know. We are people who want to tell people the good news of salvation that comes through Jesus Christ. So everything we do in these videos, that is the ultimate goal, is that all of us would come to know the truth, which I believe and I'm convicted is Jesus Christ. Now, in this video, we're going to be looking at a video from Pastor Afrika Mhlophe, where he's being interviewed, and he gets into a very interesting topic, which I think a lot of the times is overlooked. There's this modern way of viewing African spirituality that sort of tries to Christianize it. And so we remove all the rough edges around it, witchcraft, and we try and polish it. We call witchcraft magic, and all these things that are associated with it. But one of the things that for me just does not make sense is the idea of someone who has passed on, gone to the afterlife, and now we must perform a ritual for that person because they're somehow struggling on the other side. Maybe, for an example, they're cold. Maybe, for an example, they're hungry. You'll see some sangomas who will go down the river and they'll pull out some food and fruits and bananas and strawberries. And then they're going to say, we're having lunch with the ancestors. So are they hungry where they are? Can you be hungry when you are on the other side? So Pastor Afrika Mhlophe in this video helps us to deal with this question. So I just want to encourage everyone to approach it with an open mind, and that it's not really about bashing anyone, but really it's about us all learning. All of us are here to learn. And so I want to hear your views and thoughts in the comment section. Comments are welcome here. All the Christians are welcome here. All the skeptics are welcome here. Whatever you believe in, you are welcome in this channel. Let us all engage in these discussions respectfully. We're not targeting anyone, but really trying to figure out what is the truth, and so that the truth will be known to all of us. So let's watch this video and then get into some commentary at the end.
The only way there's a crossing between two worlds is if the demonic is in operation. Otherwise, if you look at the story of Luke chapter 16 of the rich man and Lazarus, the parables are stories that are made to explain difficult to understand concepts. So this is an unknown factor that Christ is making known through a story. So it's not a myth, it's a reality, but it's telling it through a story. It says the rich man dies, Lazarus both die. Death is a common allotment, doesn't discriminate. But what happens after death is not common. Rich man goes to Lazarus, Abraham's bosom, is comforted. Lazarus. The rich man goes to hell and then who complains between the two? It's the rich man, it's not Lazarus. Who complains of being thirsty or being uncomfortable? Is the rich man. So if therefore, now one of the things that people do, they do ceremonies because the dead are uncomfortable in the afterlife. Either they are thirsty or they are cold, but there's no one who is in heaven who can ever be uncomfortable. Where fact is, the water of life is there, John 4. The water you shall drink shall thirst again. But if you drink of this water, Jesus says, you shall never thirst again. So there's nothing you can do for the dead who are with God, because everything they need, God supplies. The bread of life is there. John talks about those who are clothed in white raiment in the book of Revelation. So they're not naked, they can't be cold. If God can create a heaven that lacks full capacity for comfort, how do we trust him to take care of us on earth? Jesus says, I go to my Father's house to prepare a place for you. So therefore, heaven is the most comfortable place that could ever exist.
What if they've gone to hell?
That's where the question.
Now, at this stage, Pastor Afrika lays out sort of the biblical worldview of what happens in the afterlife. You have people who will go to heaven. You have people maybe who didn't want to put their trust in Jesus Christ, people who didn't want to put their faith in the finished work of Christ, and therefore those people go to hell. Now, in African spirituality, there is no heaven necessarily and hell, but people go to the afterlife, and some are united with their ancestors, and some are maybe united with God. Like, it's not quite clear sometimes as to what happens. There's different views on it, but we're told that the ancestors are people who are basically mediating on our behalf. So they take our prayers to God. They are the ones who communicate to us what God is saying. So we can then interrogate that and say, maybe The ancestors are then people who are close to God, for them to be able to communicate all of this. So in a sense, then what we can ask, as Pastor Mhlophe has highlighted, if a person now comes out and says, I am cold, or I need this ritual because I'm struggling and suffering, that means they actually haven't made it to heaven, right? So especially for people maybe who are Christians who believe that you can still believe in the ancestors and believe in Christianity. Straight away, Pastor Afrika is laying it out for you that you cannot actually believe this, because what happens when you are there and now you are starting to feel cold? That means you actually are not in heaven. And if you're not in heaven, how can you communicate what God is saying? So let's just have that mindset as we listen to the rest of the video.
If they've gone to hell,
That's where the question is. If they're complaining they are not in heaven, that means all the more reasons you have nothing to do with them. Because if they're in hell, they're with the other guy, who you should not participate in anything that has to do with him, that is Satan. Right? So it means, unfortunately, they didn't make you, so they didn't make it to heaven. Therefore, they can't mediate between you and God, which is the whole issue of ancestors. Which means they're not talking to God on your behalf. So they can't be helping you. If they could help you, they should be helping themselves. The fact that they didn't help for me is an indication that they can't help themselves. How in the world can they help you?
in the story of the rich man, the man was uncomfortable in hell.
Yes.
He couldn't be helped by anything going on in heaven.
No.
There was nothing that could help him there. So that supports the fact that even if ancestors are uncomfortable where they are, there's nothing we can do to get over there. I love the way you describe it, and this is all over the Bible, the fact that after death, it is not possible for human being to communicate with human being across the line of death. It's all over the Bible.
So my biggest question, maybe thinking about this initially from a Christian perspective, whenever you hear people saying we need to go and do some tea, maybe for our ancestors, maybe the ancestors are cold, maybe the ancestors are thirsty. You'll notice even when we have the micimbi, like functions and there's alcohol, people will pour some alcohol on the ground first to saying they're pouring for the ancestors. Some people will pour even water. If they're drinking water, they'll throw some on the ground for the ancestors. There's people who have even gone to rivers and basically have said, we're going to go and have some lunch with the ancestors. So there are big questions here that need to be answered. Number one, from a Christian perspective, if you have a relative that says that they have gone up to God, that means they're in heaven. They cannot then be hungry. They cannot be thirsty. As Jesus says, man, whoever believes in him, says rivers of living waters will begin to well up inside of them into eternity, right? So they'll never thirst again if they drink of the waters of Christ. Whoever believes in Christ will never hunger, right? But I think we can even bring it to people who are believing in African spirituality to say, the spiritual world, for me, people who say that they've got this revelation of the spiritual world, and they've said to me in the comment section that I don't get the spiritual world. I'm coming from academics. But my question is to say, if you are in the spiritual world, how do you go hungry, right? You are not in the flesh. This is what goes hungry. So when you are standing there in the river and you are offering bananas to a spirit, the spirit cannot eat bananas, right? When you are saying the ancestors are thirsty, the spirit cannot thirst unless they are in hell. That's the only other place where we see, as Pastor Afrika Mhlophe is saying, that actually people can have this experience where they feel the pain. But you can't say that these are people who mediate between us and God, and yet they still are struggling and they're feeling thirst. I know Aubrey Mashik is the one that said his ancestors are still fighting. He can hear their voices fighting. And I'm like, if these people have so much animosity and fighting and rage, are they really with God? And if they are not with God, how can they then relay our messages to God? How are they mediating on our behalf? Whereas we know Christ is seated at the right hand of the Father, and he's the only one that is the mediator for us. But I want to interrogate this because I think that our forefathers made major mistakes when it came to spirituality. And when I say they made major mistakes, these were honest mistakes to assume that in the spiritual, someone can be cold. in the spiritual, someone can be thirsty or can want to drink alcohol, like, right? We like to have these functions, and we're saying that we're doing alcohol on behalf of the ancestors, as if the ancestors need to drink. They are alcoholics in the afterlife. But I think that the biggest issue I have is that the modern generation has actually picked up on this, where they are now saying African spirituality. And the problem with African spirituality, it repeats the same mistakes that have been made by our forefathers, where we begin to define the spiritual world the same way that we see our physical world. So if people go hungry in our physical world, we think the spiritual world is like that. If people go thirsty in our world, we think the spiritual world is like that. And now they're coming and saying African spirituality, trying to define the spiritual world with geographic locations that we see in our physical world, trying to define spirituality with black and white, trying to define spirituality in terms of ethnicity or race, right? The spiritual world does not have those things. You are imposing politics into something that it doesn't actually fit into. So the spiritual world doesn't accommodate the world that we have, the world that we live in. And this is why we say that religion is man's attempt to come to God. But salvation is God actually coming to man to save him. And this is why we are inviting people to Christianity and not to religion. Religion is saying, let's make these rituals so that we can come to God. Let's come up with these ideas so that we can come to God. Let's perform these rituals, for those who are dead. Let's try and figure out what the afterlife looks like. Let's try and figure out what the supernatural world looks like. But then instead of allowing the supernatural world to define us, we then begin to impose ourselves and begin to define the supernatural world based on what our physical world looks like. So that's the problem that is being highlighted here by Pastor Afrika, is that we cannot actually impose these things, the thirsting, the going hungry. The only way that this can actually make sense is to say that these people maybe have not made it to heaven. They are not close to God. And if they are not close to God, how then are they able to mediate on our behalf? How then are they able to communicate to God on our behalf? So those are the questions that need to be answered. We can't just say we want critical thinking from Christianity, and then when it comes to our own belief, we switch everything off. We need to open it up and say, I question the Bible, but I question my own belief. And I need to provide answers for Christians as much as I want Christians to provide for me. And this is what we seek to do in this channel. We want to bring these two communities together and say, let's have a dialogue, an honest dialogue between brothers and sisters who love each other, but really are divided on these issues. And it's okay. It's okay for us to disagree. But in the end, the truth must be the one that prevails. This is Bisrat for Africa. We'll see you guys on the next video.